Well, welcome to Soul Forum Live this morning. Hopefully, you are either joining us during our Soul Forum Live experience on Sunday morning. We gather together at 8:30 a.m. Or possibly you are viewing this on a Sunday morning via Facebook Live, which is linked obviously to our YouTube channel. So we're glad you're here. I wanted to, before I get started this morning, just kind of acknowledge how important it is that you're a part of this. I met with a woman the other day, she's sort of a new acquaintance, so I don't know her super well. But as we were in conversation and have interacted over the course of the last few months, she discovered that I lead this Soul Forum group. And she goes, you doing something on Soul Forum, on the soul? And I could tell that she did not have a lot of confidence that I would be able to coordinate a conversation or an experience at that level with people. And I didn't take any offense at it, but it hit me that the reason why this works is not because of me, it's because of us, right? The reason this works at all is because each of us are willing to share, expose, explore, articulate our own soul's journey, and we do that collaboratively. So it really is, a conversation that happens in a circle, and it's not me presenting ideas or picking up on, deep and amazing insights that somehow transform your particular path. So let's just get that straight. All right, this week is kind of a focus on, obviously, depending on your tradition, it could be a focus on Dia de los Muertos, focus on Halloween, All Souls, All Saints Day. It is that time of year where we pause as the evenings get a little bit darker earlier, and our kids start to get excited about dressing up and going trick-or-treating. It's got all that buzz in the air, of course. And I think as I was reflecting on that and what we might be able to talk about in this conversation is that it really feels like, for the most part, we've got this sort of awkward relationship with death. And I want to finish up today with a story about one of the most powerful kind of moments of experiencing death that I've had in my life that I think really changed my perspective on it. But if you look at the common culture we are in today, and the media and the entertainment industry, death is framed so negatively for the most part. It's got an evil edge to it. We think about all of these horror movies with zombies in them, people coming back from the dead. There's just a real, even death itself, right? We've kind of cleaned up, offloaded it to a professional class. We don't deal with it at all, and a lot of us don't even think about our own death. I mean, it's just not a thing. And because of that, I don't know how we've come to that, but well, even in our food, now I think about it. If you think about the food you eat, when's the last time you brought, an animal to the end of its life, or even harvested a plant and brought it to the end of its life in its transition to bring you nourishment to survive? I mean, rarely do we do that, right? I remember a number of years ago, when my kids were living in New York City, we had Thanksgiving with them, and they did a halal turkey, and I had no idea what that was all about. And then come to find out the way in which, in this particular ritual from the Islamic community, they really, honor the life of the bird and have a little ritual before they bring that bird's life to an end, and then offer it to us as a way to celebrate Thanksgiving. I mean, there are cultures and ways to do that, but we tend to just ignore all that anymore. So this time of year, I am super excited whenever there's a chance to visit some cultures and cultural wisdom that allows us to think about the possibility of integrating our experience, our understanding, our maybe fears, our perceptions around death and our experiences of death into our sense of our soul's journey or our spiritual life. And in many ways, this kind of work on soul is a kind of an integrative function, right? It's a way to integrate various perspectives and feelings and experiences into your life so you feel whole. I mean, it's about arriving at a sense of wholeness and groundedness. And so onboarding some relationship to death, or some at least awareness of that, maybe practices that remind you of how death and life really go hand in hand, how they work together throughout the billions of years of evolution. However that works for you, to have some sort of way in which that functions in your spiritual life. Dia de los Muertos is a great one for that. We're going to be celebrating that this Friday at Creekside Commons, a way to honor the vibrancy of those you have lost in your family system and even beyond, right? To honor them for a day and to celebrate their lives in so many rich and wondrous ways. And what a different attitude that is in the way in which a culture manages the experience of death and the remembrance of those who they've lost, so that they're more integrated into their daily life, right? It's a beautiful tradition. I'd encourage you to explore that yourself in one way or another. The other one that I've been noticing more and more is kind of land acknowledgements feel a little bit like that, right? There's more and more events that I go to that begin with sort of a land acknowledgement. Who were the people who were a part of this land's evolution, or this caring of the land prior to you arriving in that place, right? And to honor and acknowledge the generations that have gone on before you in the land that you rely on for sustenance. And it's a beautiful way of pausing. It's in some ways it's very prayerful, right? It's like pausing before you celebrate on land all those who have been there before you, and seeing yourself as part of that legacy. It's just a rich, at least that's the way I'm starting to frame it, kind of a rich way of acknowledging those who are no longer with us, but whose legacy, memory, maybe energy, passions still linger in the very landscape on which we find ourselves. So another great way to pay attention to how to integrate this sort of stuff into your spiritual practices. I was reminded by a book that was given to me a couple years back, mostly about indigenous wisdom. And these are the words of Sherman Alexie, who's a Washington Indian, who writes about the way in which her Indian peoples are finding their way back to the heartbeat of their traditions, and how that is functioning for them as sort of a guiding principle. And she writes this: "Every Indian has the blood of the tribal memory circling in her heart. Today, more and more Indians are coming back, not to the despair that has marked reservation life, but to the strong sound of the drum." I think what she's doing in that poem is connecting the heartbeat of tribal memory, right, to the rhythms of the drum in her current cultural context, and trying to link together these generations through the rituals that they have. That's my guess of what she's articulating there. And I guess my question is, for us, how do we tend to those drum beats or heartbeats that are not just our own, right, but that are tethered to generations of hearts beating before ours, and our life being gift to that next generation and the one after that. I mean, I think it's just a beautiful way to stay connected to the wonder of the generations that have gone before us. In addition, I wanted to share a piece by Drew Dillinger, who then expands the notion to the way in which we honor all that has gone before us and, in a sense, given of itself, in a sense, fallen into the history of our shared cosmos? And are we holding them as we try to find our deepest voice? Right? So again, it's not always about trying to craft a spirituality that just works for you in your time and place, although that's super important, but the you that is then grounded at different levels and different experiences, and even maybe back throughout the courses of time. He writes this in his, this is just a segment of one of his poems that he wrote that I think kind of connects to this in a beautiful way. The poem is called Ancestors and Angels. I feel like the ancestors brought us here, and they expect great things. They expect us to say what we think and live how we feel and follow the hard paths that bring us near joy. They expect us to nurture all of our children. And so I write words so to catch up to the ancestors. I write poems to welcome the angels and conjure the ancestors. Isn't that beautiful? I feel like the ancestors brought us here and they expect great things. Just a couple of reminders about how you might explore, and we'll have a conversation about this on Sunday and maybe even on Tuesday night too. If people join on that, I'm gone on vacation that week, but some people might join for that. You know, how do you imagine integrating and reflecting on those who have gone before you in your own spiritual path? One of the people that did that, I think, so well for us in our Soul Forum podcast was Brian Enright, who kind of reminded us, and that podcast is coming up here in the next few weeks. He tends to look at discarded items in our culture that have taken lifetimes to create, resources that are now, drawn from out of the planet. So the way in which we kind of pull stuff out of the planet and in a sense kind of take life from the planet, right? So he watches for these things that we've created as a culture, and then we just discard completely and we pay no mind to them. And he says, for him as an artist, to capture the essence of them again, now that they've manifested in our lives as just meaningless trash or things we would throw away, is to allow them to reclaim their deep and historic voice. And that deep and historic voice actually reminds us who we are. And I just encourage you to listen to when Brian Enright is interviewed in our Soul Forum podcast, because he really taps into another way. We talk about Dia de los Muertos, we talk about land acknowledgement, but also to talk about how we pay attention to or mind or tend to the very stuff that is a part of our everyday life, and honor it in a way that allows it to have its ancient voice, even if we've kind of expelled it or discarded it. Is that really what we should be doing? How do we allow it to speak again? Lori and I were so enamored by a piece that he did that tried to do that with toothbrushes, that which tend to last multiple lifetimes, right? You use a toothbrush and throw it away, and it doesn't go away, right? And he did a whole art piece using toothbrushes, and we purchased that for our home, so it's here on site. I should have brought it in. Maybe I'll try to send a picture of it along with this presentation today. But anyway, it's another way of doing what we're talking about, right? Let's not make spirituality a thin slice of this moment in time, this generation, but can you start to value add richness to it, right? By reaching your soul's roots out wide so they're connected to the depths of all that went before, not to live in the past, but to draw from the energy and wonder and the joy and the passions and the focus and the wisdom of the past, and also to be willing to hand that on to future generations, like Brian Enright, as an artist wanting to pass that on to future generations, and that you stand always sort of in this beautiful middle place between the two is another great way to frame that. So how do I kind of find a way, and I give this some thought before we talk, is that how do I find a way, how do you find a way to not ignore or dismiss the role that death plays in your life, but to embrace it enough so that it has some potential to be integrated into the vibrant, alive spirit that you carry at the moment, right? How can you do that? And we want to have some conversations about that. So let me finish up today with just a brief story. This story happened to me years ago. And I share this story because it might function a little bit like a metaphor, but it was a wake-up call for me about how disconnected I had come from the death experience. And having been a clergy person for almost 30 years, I've done a lot of funerals and I've stood by people as they've said their final goodbyes. So I'm not like I'm a stranger to death, but typically when I would engage it in sort of like a kind of a very professional way, right? I would enter in and provide services and be present for the family or the individual there. But there was this one moment when I got a phone call out of the blue. A woman who was not quite living a homeless lifestyle, but pretty close. And her mother had just passed away. And she didn't have any money, and her mother was scooped up in the county system and was going to be cremated at the crematorium down in Emeryville. It's a big industrial site. And so she calls me and tells me this big story, and she said, would you be willing to come to the crematorium with me and just say a few words before that happens? I'm like, okay, I guess I could do that. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know her. I didn't know her mother. And I also had a run to IKEA I had to make, which happened to be in Emeryville. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to IKEA on that day anyway. I should have never said that, but that's what I was doing. I'm going to IKEA. And so I said, I'll meet you there and we'll do something for your mom. So I end up down at this big crematorium in Emeryville with this woman, and we get to know each other just a little bit as we're sitting in the lobby with, on old metal chairs. This is not a place where the public usually shows up. It's a place where they process all these bodies and do all these cremations every day, one right after another. And so they say, well, they tell her, we're about ready to do your mother, and they walk us into the warehouse, which is filled with cardboard boxes, all filled with people who have passed away, just lined up to move through this crematorium and be cremated. And the weight of that moment alone, being present in the kind of the palpable feeling of so many lives that have gone silent, filled with stories and family members, and here in this sort of industrial crematorium, kind of forgotten, right? And they're just in the queue to be cremated. And I was literally just moved by the power in this place and the auspicious depth of death itself that literally was stacked from the floor to the ceilings. And so we got to the place where they brought her mother in a cardboard box and put her on a roller, what do you call it, a rack. And the fires are starting to fill inside of the, where they do the cremation. And in the heat, literally, of that moment, as we stood there and we heard the fires burning, and she put her hand on the cardboard box, and so did I. We just said a few words about her mother, and she wept a little bit, and I got a little choked up because it's a pretty powerful moment. And then they slid the box and her mother into the chamber, and we watched as it ignited in flames. Right. Stood there as they cremated her mother. And then after the process was over, we actually had to wait in the waiting room for a little while, and then they asked us, do we want to be there as they brought the ashes out? And so we went together and gathered up all the ashes right after the process was over, and put them in an urn, and I said a few words, and then we were done, right? That said, that experience with that woman was a reminder to me, even though as a clergy person, I felt like I was so close to this experience, that I had not to date been that close to the experience, that I had always given it to the professionals and I didn't have to deal with any of that kind of stuff, right? This one had a palpable effect on me, and it made me embrace that experience more fully and integrate it into my own self-understanding, right? It's hard not to go through that and not see that, I'm probably destined for the same thing. Anyway, it was just a beautiful experience. And to cap it off, at the end, I told her, well, listen, I'm glad I was able to be a part of this, but I'm going to go to IKEA now and do some shopping. And she just looked at me with kind of this loving heart that had emerged in this brief relationship we had. And she said, do you mind if I go along with you? Because I don't know that I want to be alone right now. And so we went shopping, me, her, and an urn filled with her mother in IKEA that day. And then after I bought a few, I think there were shelving units for church, we parted ways, and we never saw each other again. That moment was a little bit like the moment I think Brian Enright has when he experiences that which we've discarded and allows that to retell its story to him and for him to share that story with others. That moment was like the land acknowledgement moments, where there's just enough pause to let your being sink into the ground and be enriched by all the lives that have gone before you, and to know that they have, they were there, and they in some ways are still there, right? That palpable experience. The same with Dia de los Muertos, this capacity to draw into your family life, your personal life, and even your home life, a connection to all those who have passed, another rich experience. And my encouragement today is simply to say, don't dismiss the opportunity to embrace your experience of death and those you've lost into who you're becoming. Find ways that works for you and see how it has some sort of holistic effect on your journey into your understanding of soul and how it moves in the world. Let me close with Drew Dillinger's little poetic piece again. I feel like the ancestors brought us here, and they expect great things. These are the great things. They expect us to say what we think and live how we feel and follow the hard paths that bring us near joy. I write words to catch up with the ancestors. I write poems to welcome the angels and conjure up those ancestors again. My hope is that you too, along the way, find ways to be welcoming to the voice of all ancestors that have gone before us as we live in this moment and as we pass this moment on to the next generation. All right, all. Have a beautiful holiday, whether it be with Dia de los Muertos, whether it be with All Saints Day, All Souls Day. I know there's another one. There's a celebration of light this year that all of a sudden escaped me. No matter how you mark the holiday, make sure you pause long enough to honor all those who have birthed this moment that we get to share. All right, see you next week.